He thought the storm would erase the dog by morning. Instead, it brought back something he had spent 12 years trying to forget. The snow began falling before sunset over Black Creek Ridge, a quiet mountain town tucked deep into the Colorado Rockies. By 8 o'clock, more than 6 inches had already buried the sidewalks, and the wind swept through the pine trees with a low, mournful whistle that sounded almost human. Storefront lights glowed faintly through curtains of white. Pickup trucks moved slowly along Main Street. Most people had already retreated indoors, gathering around fireplaces and hot coffee while the blizzard tightened its grip on the valley. At the edge of town, beyond a line of iron gates and stone walls, stood the Langford estate. The property stretched across nearly 40 acres of snow-covered hills, illuminated by rows of elegant lanterns that cast warm pools of golden light onto the frozen ground. Inside the mansion, Victor Langford sat beside a massive stone fireplace, a crystal glass resting loosely in his hand, while local news anchors praised his latest charitable donation. To the town, Victor was a success story, a self-made millionaire, a generous benefactor, a man who sponsored youth programs, funded hospital expansions, and appeared in photographs smiling beside politicians and community leaders. Few questioned him. Fewer still knew anything about the years before he became wealthy. A sudden bark echoed from somewhere outside. Victor frowned. Another bark followed. Sharp, brief, unwelcome. He walked toward the tall, living room windows and pulled back the curtain. There, standing just beyond the gate, was a German shepherd. The dog looked thin beneath its snow-covered coat. Frost clung to its fur. Its paws were nearly buried beneath drifting snow. Yet it stood perfectly still, staring directly toward the mansion. Victor's expression hardened instantly. The glass in his hand lowered slightly. For reasons he could not explain, the sight unsettled him. The dog was not begging. It was not wandering aimlessly. It simply stood there watching, waiting. Another gust of wind pushed through the property. Snow swirled around the animal, but it refused to move. Victor reached for the intercom. "Security," he said. "There's a stray at the front gate." A brief pause followed. "You want animal control, sir?" "No. Just drive it away." "In this weather?" Victor's jaw tightened. "Drive it away." Minutes later, headlights cut through the snowfall as a security vehicle rolled toward the entrance. The dog finally stepped back. Slowly, reluctantly. One guard opened the gate and approached, waving his arms. The shepherd retreated several yards into the storm. Then it stopped. The animal lifted its head. Its amber eyes locked onto Victor, who still stood behind the glass watching from inside the warmth of his mansion. For one strange second, neither moved. Victor felt something cold settle deep in his chest. Not fear exactly. Recognition. The feeling vanished almost immediately. Impossible, he told himself. He pulled the curtain closed and turned away. Outside, the shepherd disappeared into the blizzard. The gate shut behind it. The estate returned to silence. But miles away, on a lonely stretch of snow-covered highway, another pair of headlights appeared. Caleb Harper gripped the steering wheel of his aging Ford F-150 as he navigated the icy road home. The former Marine had spent years trusting instincts he could never fully explain. Tonight, as snow hammered against the windshield, one of those instincts told him to slow down. Moments later, a shape emerged from the storm ahead. A German shepherd stood alone in the middle of the road, and around its neck hung something that glinted briefly beneath the falling snow. The dog did not move when the truck stopped. Snow swept across the highway in silver sheets, hissing against the pavement and rattling against Caleb Harper's windshield. For a moment, the former Marine simply sat behind the wheel, staring through the storm at the lone German shepherd standing beneath the glow of his headlights. Most strays would have run. Most frightened animals would have disappeared into the darkness the second a vehicle approached. This one remained perfectly still. Caleb switched off the engine. The sudden silence felt enormous. Only the wind remained, rolling across the mountains, with a deep hollow sound that echoed through the night. He stepped out into the cold. The temperature had already dropped below 10 degrees Fahrenheit. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he approached carefully. The shepherd watched him. Amber eyes. Intelligent. Alert. Not aggressive. Not afraid. Just watching. "Easy there," Caleb said softly. A cloud of breath drifted into the frozen air. The dog tilted its head slightly. Its fur was thick but covered with ice crystals. Snow clung to its back and shoulders. It had clearly spent hours outside in conditions that would challenge even the toughest animal. Yet something else caught Caleb's attention. Around the dog's neck hung an old leather collar. Weathered, cracked, nearly hidden beneath its fur. A small metal tag dangled from one side. The shepherd took a few slow steps forward. Caleb crouched. The animal stopped only a few feet away, close enough for him to see the frost gathered around its whiskers, close enough to notice how tired it looked. Yet there was determination in those eyes, the kind he had once seen in working dogs during deployment. Dogs that never quit. Dogs that stayed focused long after everyone else had given up. "You have been through a rough night, buddy," Caleb murmured. He reached out carefully. The shepherd neither retreated nor advanced. After a long second, it allowed his hand to touch its neck. Caleb brushed away a layer of snow and turned the metal tag toward the light. The engraved letters were faded with age, some nearly erased by time. But one phrase remained readable. Black Creek Farm. Caleb frowned immediately. The name stirred a distant memory. He had heard it before. Years ago, long before he moved back to Colorado. Somewhere in town conversations, newspaper stories, local rumors whispered over coffee counters and hardware store aisles. Black Creek Farm, the abandoned property beyond the northern ridge. The place nobody talked about anymore. A gust of wind swept across the road. The shepherd suddenly lifted its head. Its ears sharpened. Its attention shifted toward the mountains looming beyond the trees. Caleb followed its gaze. Nothing but darkness. Snow. Pines swaying in the storm. Yet the dog remained focused on something unseen beyond the ridge. Then, without warning, it began walking. Not away. Not randomly. Purposefully. 3 steps forward. Then it stopped and looked back at Caleb. Waiting. Caleb felt an unexpected chill that had nothing to do with the weather. The shepherd looked at him again, then toward the mountains, then back to him, as if asking him to follow. "You have somewhere you want to go?" Caleb asked quietly. The dog turned and took several more steps into the falling snow. Once again it paused. Once again it looked back. Caleb had learned many things during his years as a Marine. One lesson had never left him. Sometimes instinct notices the truth before logic catches up. He glanced toward the dark ridge rising above town, then back at the strange shepherd standing in the storm. Finally he exhaled. "All right," he said. "Show me." The dog immediately started moving north. And somewhere far beyond the snowfall, hidden among the mountains and forgotten years, something was waiting for them. Some names disappear from maps long before they disappear from memory. The storm finally loosened its grip shortly before dawn. Snow still drifted across the empty roads, but the fierce wind had softened into a steady whisper moving through the pines. Caleb followed the German shepherd for nearly 2 miles before the dog suddenly changed direction and descended toward town. By sunrise, both of them stood outside a small diner on Main Street. Warm yellow light spilled from the windows. The smell of coffee and fresh biscuits drifted into the cold morning air. Caleb tied his truck keys to a belt loop and stepped inside. The shepherd remained close behind him. A few customers glanced up from their breakfasts. Most noticed the dog first. Then they noticed the old collar. Then they quickly looked away. Caleb caught the reaction immediately. People recognized something. He approached the counter where an elderly man sat alone beside the window. Walter Briggs came to the diner every morning at 6 sharp. Everyone in Black Creek knew that. At 72 years old, Walter carried the look of a man shaped by mountain winters and decades of hard work. His weathered hands wrapped around a steaming coffee mug as he stared out at the snow-covered street. Caleb slid into the booth opposite him. "Morning, Walter." The old man nodded. "You are out early." Caleb gestured toward the shepherd. "Found him during the storm." Walter turned casually toward the dog. The moment his eyes landed on the collar, his expression changed. His hand froze halfway to the coffee cup. For several seconds, neither man spoke. The diner seemed quieter. Even the clinking dishes felt distant. Walter slowly stood. He approached the shepherd carefully. The dog remained calm. Walter knelt despite the stiffness in his knees and brushed away a patch of fur covering the metal tag. The old man stared at the engraving. His lips parted slightly. "No," he whispered. "It cannot be." Caleb felt his pulse quicken. "You know this dog?" Walter swallowed hard. "Not this one." His voice sounded fragile. "But I know that collar." Outside, snowflakes drifted past the glass like silent ghosts. Walter remained kneeling beside the shepherd. His eyes had grown distant, focused on memories only he could see. 12 years ago, he finally said, there was a man named Daniel Mercer. Several customers nearby lowered their newspapers. Nobody interrupted. Nobody needed to. Everyone knew the name. Nobody ever spoke it aloud anymore. Walter continued. Daniel owned Black Creek Farm. Best horse breeder in the county. Honest man. Worked harder than anyone I ever met. The shepherd lifted its head. Its ears twitched at the sound of the name. Walter noticed immediately. So did Caleb. One winter, Walter said quietly, Daniel vanished. The old man looked directly at Caleb. The sheriff searched for weeks. Volunteers searched. Nothing. No sign of him. No explanation. Caleb frowned. People thought he left. Walter gave a slow, bitter smile. That is what they were told. Silence settled over the booth. Then Walter reached toward the shepherd and gently touched the old collar once more. His eyes glistened beneath the morning light. But Daniel never ran. The dog suddenly stood. It turned toward the diner door and released a low, impatient whine. Then it looked back at Caleb as if urging him onward. Walter followed its gaze. The color slowly drained from his face. Dear Lord, he whispered. I think that dog is trying to take you somewhere Daniel wanted someone to find. The dog did not wait for lunch or warmth or another conversation. The moment Caleb pushed through the diner door, the German shepherd was already moving across the snow-covered sidewalk with quiet determination. Walter followed them outside despite the cold. His coat hung loosely from narrow shoulders, and his weathered face carried an expression Caleb had never seen before. Fear mixed with hope, the kind that only appears when old memories begin breathing again. If you are going after him, Walter said, glancing at the shepherd, be careful where he leads you. Caleb stopped beside his truck. You think this has something to do with Daniel Mercer? Walter stared toward the northern ridge. The mountains rose beneath pale winter sunlight, their slopes covered in fresh snow sparkling like scattered glass. I think some stories refuse to stay buried forever. The shepherd released a short bark and started walking again. Caleb climbed into the truck and followed slowly along an old service road that wound beyond town. The route climbed steadily through dense pine forest. Snow weighed heavily on branches overhead. Every few hundred yards, the dog glanced back to make sure Caleb remained behind. Hour after hour, they moved deeper into country few people visited anymore. By early afternoon, the sky had cleared completely. Sunlight reflected across untouched snowfields, almost too bright to look at directly. Caleb finally parked near a rusted gate leaning crookedly beside the road. Beyond it stretched hundreds of acres of abandoned land. Broken fences, empty pastures, weathered barns collapsing beneath years of neglect. A faded wooden sign still stood near the entrance. Most of the paint had vanished long ago, but one name remained visible beneath the frost. Black Creek Farm. The shepherd moved through the opening without hesitation. Caleb followed on foot. Silence surrounded the property. No engines, no voices, only distant wind brushing through frozen grass. The farm felt suspended in time, as if someone had simply walked away one day and never returned. The dog crossed the main pasture and headed toward a grove of aspens near the northern edge of the property. Suddenly it stopped. Then it began digging. Snow scattered beneath powerful paws. Caleb approached carefully. What is it? The shepherd continued digging. Faster now. More urgently. Within minutes, something metallic appeared beneath the snow. Caleb dropped to one knee and brushed away the ice. A small object emerged from the frozen ground. Circular. Tarnished. Attached to a broken chain. He lifted it carefully. It was an old pocket watch. The silver casing had darkened with age, but the initials engraved on the back remained visible. DM Caleb opened the cover. Inside rested a tiny photograph protected beneath cracked glass. A smiling man stood beside a German shepherd in front of a white farmhouse. The resemblance was unmistakable. Same intelligent eyes. Same sable coat. The dog in the photograph was older, but clearly related to the shepherd standing beside him now. Caleb looked toward his companion. Was he your owner? The shepherd sat quietly. Wind stirred through the aspens overhead. Then the animal rose and began moving again. Not toward town. Not toward the farmhouse ruins. Farther north. Toward land that now belonged to Victor Langford. Caleb stared at the pocket watch resting in his gloved hand. Daniel Mercer had vanished 12 years earlier. Yet somehow this dog had just led him to something nobody else had found. And judging by the urgency in the shepherd's movements, the watch was only the beginning. By the time the winter sun began sliding toward the western peaks, Caleb could no longer dismiss the feeling that someone else knew exactly what he was doing. The land beyond Black Creek Farm gradually rose toward a series of wooded hills now owned by Victor Langford. Fresh tire tracks crossed the snow in places where no public roads existed. Several times Caleb noticed footprints that were not his own. They appeared briefly beside a fence line before disappearing beneath drifting snow. The German shepherd seemed to notice them too. Its ears remained alert. Its pace quickened. The farther north they traveled, the more restless the dog became. Around 4 o'clock, Caleb reached an overlook above a narrow valley. From there he could see the sprawling Langford property stretching across the mountainside. Sunlight reflected from distant windows. The mansion appeared peaceful from afar. Respectable. Untouchable. Yet Caleb could not stop thinking about Walter's words. Daniel never ran. Somewhere between the abandoned farm and the millionaire's estate, a missing chapter remained hidden. The shepherd suddenly barked and sprinted downhill. Caleb followed as quickly as the uneven terrain allowed. Snow slid beneath his boots. Pine branches brushed against his shoulders. Ahead, the dog disappeared behind a cluster of evergreens near an aging maintenance structure sitting alone at the edge of the property. The building looked forgotten. Its metal roof sagged beneath years of snow and weather. Most people would have walked past it without a second glance. The shepherd had other ideas. When Caleb arrived, the dog was already digging furiously beside the foundation. Snow flew behind him. His paws scraped through ice and frozen soil with relentless determination. Caleb knelt and began clearing snow with his gloved hands. Several inches below the surface, something hard emerged. Not stone, not wood. He brushed away more snow. A weathered leather satchel appeared beneath the frozen ground. Caleb carefully pulled it free. The leather cracked slightly as he opened the flap. Inside were old papers sealed within waterproof sleeves. Property maps, survey records, financial documents bearing dates from more than a decade earlier. The pages had yellowed with age but remained readable. Caleb scanned several lines and immediately felt his stomach tighten. The maps showed original property boundaries belonging to Black Creek Farm. Yet handwritten notes in red ink marked sections of land that later became part of Victor Langford's holdings. Several signatures appeared inconsistent. Others seemed incomplete. The shepherd continued pacing beside him, whining softly, almost anxiously, as if urging him to keep searching. Then a distant engine echoed through the valley. Caleb froze. A dark SUV appeared on a service road nearly half a mile away. It slowed near the maintenance building before stopping completely. Nobody exited. The vehicle remained motionless for several long seconds. Watching, Caleb could feel it. Eventually, the SUV turned around and disappeared behind a ridge. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. He looked down at the satchel again. Somebody had hidden these documents carefully. Somebody had wanted them preserved. More importantly, somebody else seemed concerned they might be found. The shepherd returned to the exact spot where the satchel had been buried. Then he began digging again. Slower this time. Deeper. Caleb moved beside him and cleared away another layer of frozen earth. A few moments later, something pale emerged beneath the snow. He leaned closer. The shape was unmistakable. Human remains rested beneath the frozen ground, hidden for years beneath winter after winter of silence. The shepherd stopped digging and sat quietly beside the discovery, staring into the fading light as though he had finally led someone to the place he had never forgotten. The discovery spread through Black Creek faster than the storm that had brought the shepherd into town. By sunrise, sheriff deputies, forensic specialists, and survey crews had gathered near the old maintenance building. Yellow winter sunlight spilled across the valley while fresh snow reflected against the mountains like polished silver. Caleb stood quietly beside the German shepherd as investigators worked carefully around the site. Nobody spoke much. The mountain air seemed to demand silence. Hours passed. Measurements were taken. Records were checked. The satchel and documents were cataloged. Shortly after noon, Sheriff Raymond Keller approached Caleb with a grave expression. "We received preliminary confirmation," he said. "The personal items recovered at the site match records connected to Daniel Mercer." The words settled heavily between them. 12 years. 12 winters. 12 years of unanswered questions finally moving toward an answer. Across town, People gathered inside diners, hardware stores, and church halls discussing the news. Older residents remembered Daniel clearly. Younger residents knew only fragments of the story. Yet everyone understood the significance. The mystery that had haunted Black Creek for more than a decade was no longer a rumor. It was real. Reporters began arriving before evening. Satellite vans parked near the courthouse. Television crews filmed the abandoned farm from every possible angle. Questions filled every conversation. How had Daniel ended up there? Why had the evidence remained hidden for so long? Who had known the truth? Victor Langford watched the coverage from his private office overlooking snow-covered hills. The television screen reflected across the glass behind his desk. News anchors repeated Daniel Mercer's name again and again. Victor muted the broadcast. His jaw tightened. The comfortable confidence he usually carried seemed absent now. Several business associates attempted to call throughout the afternoon. He ignored them. Outside his office window, snow drifted gently across the property. Everything appeared calm. Yet for the first time in years, Victor looked uneasy inside his own home. Meanwhile, the German Shepherd refused to rest. Even after hours spent in the freezing valley, the dog remained alert. Its attention never wandered far from the northern ridge. Caleb noticed it immediately. Most animals would have relaxed after leading people to such an important discovery. This shepherd behaved differently. He paced, watched, waited. As darkness approached, Caleb returned to the abandoned farm with Walter Briggs. The old man stared across the property while long shadows stretched over the snow. Daniel deserved to be found, Walter said quietly. His family deserved answers. Caleb nodded. Then why does it feel like this is not finished? Walter looked toward the shepherd. The dog stood near the barn ruins facing north. Completely still. Because he knows something we do not, Walter replied. A cold breeze moved through the pasture. The shepherd suddenly released a low whine and started walking again. Not toward the valley where the discovery had been made. Not toward town. Farther north. Toward a section of land hidden behind dense pine forest. Caleb followed with his eyes until the dog stopped beside an overgrown stone foundation nearly concealed beneath snow. Then the shepherd began scratching at the frozen ground once more. Slowly, deliberately, as if pointing toward a second secret buried beneath the mountain. Caleb exchanged a glance with Walter. Neither man spoke. They simply watched the dog continue digging beneath the fading winter light and understood the same unsettling truth. Finding Daniel Mercer had answered one question. The shepherd was telling them there was another answer still waiting to be uncovered. Some truths hide beneath the earth. Others hide inside the people who spent years pretending they never existed. The next morning arrived bright and cold. Fresh sunlight poured across Black Creek Ridge, turning every snow-covered field into a sheet of white gold. Yet despite the beauty of the morning, an uneasy feeling lingered throughout town. News crews continued arriving. Reporters interviewed longtime residents. Old photographs of Daniel Mercer appeared on television screens across Colorado. Questions multiplied faster than answers. Caleb returned to the stone foundation shortly after sunrise. The German Shepherd was already there waiting. He had spent the night on the property despite the freezing temperatures. Snow dusted his back and shoulders, but his eyes remained fixed on the same patch of frozen ground. Walter Briggs joined them carrying a thermos of coffee. Neither man spoke much. The silence felt important. The dog suddenly stepped forward and began scratching again. Snow scattered across the old stones. Caleb grabbed a shovel from his truck and started helping. For nearly an hour they worked carefully around the foundation. Beneath layers of ice and packed soil, the outline of something man-made slowly emerged. Wooden boards. A concealed hatch. Weathered by time, but still intact. Caleb knelt and cleared away the remaining dirt. The hinges groaned softly when he lifted it open. A narrow underground storage space appeared below. Cool air drifted upward carrying the scent of aged wood and forgotten years. Caleb switched on a flashlight and climbed down carefully. Dust floated through the beam of light. Shelves lined the small chamber. Cardboard boxes sat stacked against the walls exactly where someone had left them more than a decade earlier. Walter followed slowly behind. Neither man expected what they found next. Inside the first box rested folders filled with financial records, property surveys, bank statements, legal correspondence. Caleb opened one folder and immediately recognized Victor Langford's name. Then another. Then another. The documents revealed transactions dating back to the period just before Daniel Mercer disappeared. Several land transfers appeared incomplete. Others contained conflicting valuations. Handwritten notes connected properties that eventually became part of Victor's expanding real estate empire. Walter stared in disbelief. "These should have been submitted during the original ownership hearings," he whispered. Caleb continued examining the files. Then he discovered something even more significant. A small digital recorder sealed inside a waterproof container. The battery was long dead, but the device appeared preserved remarkably well. Carefully packed beside it was a handwritten note. The paper had yellowed with age. Daniel's signature rested at the bottom. Caleb read the first sentence aloud. "If anyone ever finds this, the truth is in the recording." For several seconds, nobody moved. Above them, the German Shepherd released a sharp bark from ground level, as if he already understood what they had found. By late afternoon, technicians successfully recovered the contents stored inside the device. Sheriff Keller personally arrived to oversee the review. Caleb, Walter, and several investigators gathered quietly around a speaker inside the sheriff's office. Static filled the room at first. Then a voice emerged. Older, calm, unmistakably Daniel Mercer. The recording described disputed land agreements, missing financial disclosures, and concerns Daniel had documented shortly before his disappearance. More importantly, it identified specific meetings and records investigators had never previously examined. When the audio ended, silence filled the room. Sheriff Keller slowly removed his glasses. Nobody needed to explain the significance. For the first time, evidence existed that connected years of unanswered questions to something far larger than a simple disappearance. Across town, Victor Langford received a phone call. Witnesses later said his expression changed the moment he answered. The confidence that had defined him for years seemed to vanish. Meanwhile, outside the sheriff's office, the German Shepherd sat quietly beneath the falling evening light. His mission was not finished, but for the first time in 12 years, the truth had finally found its voice. The mountain town woke to a different kind of storm. There were no howling winds this time. No walls of snow sweeping across the valleys. Instead, questions moved through Black Creek Ridge like wildfire. Every local newspaper carried the same story. Every radio station repeated the same names. Daniel Mercer, Black Creek Farm, hidden records, newly recovered evidence. For years, Victor Langford had been the man everyone admired. His photograph hung inside community centers. His donations funded school projects and holiday events. Now reporters gathered outside his office before sunrise. Camera crews lined the sidewalks. Investors demanded explanations. Business partners suddenly stopped returning calls. Caleb watched much of it unfold from a corner booth inside the diner where this strange journey had truly begun. The German Shepherd rested quietly beside him, his head lying across his front paws. For the first time since Caleb found him during the blizzard, the dog appeared calmer. Not peaceful, not yet, but calmer. Walter Briggs sat across from them holding a newspaper whose front page displayed an image of Daniel Mercer taken years earlier at Black Creek Farm. "He finally has a voice again," Walter said softly. Caleb nodded. "And people are finally listening." Throughout the day, investigators continued reviewing the contents of the underground archive. Additional records surfaced. Financial ledgers, property assessments, correspondence that revealed transactions never properly disclosed. The picture became clearer with every passing hour. What had once appeared to be ordinary business growth now raised serious questions about how certain properties had changed ownership over the years. Sheriff Keller remained careful with every public statement. Facts mattered. Evidence mattered. Assumptions did not. Yet even with that caution, the impact was impossible to ignore. By afternoon, several major projects associated with Victor's company were suspended pending review. Board members announced internal investigations. Longtime associates publicly distanced themselves. The reputation that had taken decades to build seemed to weaken with each new headline. Meanwhile, the German Shepherd drew attention of his own. Reporters wanted photographs. Families brought treats. Children left handwritten notes thanking the dog for helping solve the mystery. Caleb politely declined interviews whenever possible. The story was not about him. It was not even about the attention surrounding the investigation. It was about a man who had disappeared and a truth that refused to disappear with him. Late that evening, Sheriff Keller requested a meeting at the courthouse. Several investigators presented findings recovered from the recorder, the satchel, and the hidden storage chamber. The room remained quiet as evidence was organized chronologically across a large table. When the final timeline was completed, even the most skeptical observers could see how many unanswered questions now had supporting documentation. Nobody celebrated. Nobody cheered. Justice was not a spectacle. It was simply the slow arrival of daylight after a very long night. Outside, snow began falling again. Gentle flakes drifted beneath courthouse lamps and settled across empty sidewalks. Caleb stepped onto the front steps with the German shepherd beside him. Across the street, a television crew packed equipment into a van before driving away. The town gradually returned to silence. The dog sat looking toward the distant mountains where Black Creek Farm rested beneath fresh snow. Caleb followed his gaze. "You never gave up, did you?" he asked quietly. The shepherd blinked but never looked away. Then, far in the distance, the courthouse clock struck 8. Its echo rolled across the valley. The German shepherd slowly stood. His ears lifted toward the northern ridge once more. And for the first time since the investigation began, Caleb realized something important. The dog was no longer searching for the truth. He was waiting for something else. Winter did not last forever in Black Creek Ridge. Week by week, the deep snow retreated from the hillsides. Streams reappeared beneath sheets of melting ice. Pine branches grew lighter. The long silence of the mountains slowly gave way to birdsong carried on cool spring mornings. Life moved forward the way it always does. Patiently, quietly, without asking anyone for permission. The investigation continued through official channels, guided by evidence rather than rumor. Records were examined. Questions received answers. The story that had remained unfinished for 12 years finally reached its conclusion. For the people of Black Creek, what mattered most was not headlines or courtrooms. What mattered was that Daniel Mercer was no longer forgotten. His name was spoken openly again. His life was remembered. His family finally received the dignity of truth. On a bright April morning, residents gathered near Black Creek Farm beneath a clear blue sky. The old property looked different now. Volunteers had repaired sections of fencing. Wild grass had begun returning to the pastures. The abandoned feeling that once haunted the land seemed to be fading. A simple memorial stood beneath a grove of aspens overlooking the valley. Nothing elaborate, just a polished stone marker, a photograph of Daniel smiling beside his faithful German shepherd, and fresh flowers placed there by neighbors who still remembered his kindness. Caleb arrived early with the dog walking quietly at his side. The shepherd looked healthier than the frightened stray Caleb had found during the blizzard months earlier. His coat shone beneath the sunlight. Strength had returned to his frame, yet the intelligence in his amber eyes remained unchanged. He approached the memorial slowly and sat before it. For several minutes, he did not move. The breeze stirred gently through the aspens overhead. Leaves whispered softly against one another like distant voices sharing old stories. Walter Briggs stood nearby holding his hat against his chest. Age had bent his shoulders, but not his heart. Looking at the memorial, he smiled through moist eyes. "Welcome home, Daniel," he whispered. No speech followed. None was necessary. Some moments become sacred precisely because nobody tries to fill them with words. The gathering eventually ended. Families returned to town. Vehicles disappeared down country roads. By afternoon, only Caleb and the shepherd remained beneath the trees. Sunlight filtered through fresh spring leaves and painted shifting patterns across the grass. Caleb sat on a fallen log facing the valley. The dog rested beside him. Together they watched clouds drift above distant mountains. "You carried this all by yourself," Caleb said quietly. "All those years." The shepherd lifted his head. Caleb reached over and scratched gently behind one ear. The dog leaned into the touch. Not dramatically, just enough. Trust given without conditions. A few moments later the shepherd stood and walked toward the memorial one final time. He sat before the stone marker, looked at the photograph, then slowly lowered himself into the grass. His body relaxed. His breathing became calm and steady. For the first time since Caleb had met him, there was no urgency in his eyes. No searching, no waiting, only peace. The mission that had guided him through storms, seasons, and years of silence had finally ended. Caleb understood it immediately. Some dogs guard homes. Some guard families. This one had guarded a promise. The afternoon sun settled warmly across the hillside. Wind moved gently through the aspens. Somewhere in the valley below, church bells echoed across the town. The shepherd closed his eyes and rested comfortably beside the memorial. Caleb sat nearby, saying nothing. Neither man nor dog needed words anymore. Above them, the mountains stood unchanged, watching over the valley just as they always had. And beneath their silent gaze, a forgotten truth had finally found its way home.